Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. Today's video, we are talking about wedding setups and specifically setting up and decorating your wedding using round tables rather than rectangle tables. For the longest time, I feel like it was just the standard and the norm to be using round tables for wedding setups, and we rarely saw rectangle tables. And then within the last decade or so, I feel like there's been a rise in the popularity of rectangle tables and primarily like farm tables. So those large wooden farm tables have become increasingly popular over the last probably within the last 7-8 years. And while that is still maintaining its popularity, we are seeing the use of round tables come back and kind of being able to dress up a round table and using that in your overall floor plan and layout at weddings coming back in popularity. And there are differences to note when it comes to setting up the floor plan of your wedding as well as the overall aesthetic and design that can vary based on having rectangle tables versus round tables. So I love a rectangle table. I love decorating rectangle tables. I feel like they're a little bit easier to decorate and have kind of as your layout. So that will always be something that I love doing. But I also really enjoy the kind of the flexibility that round tables can give you and a little bit more varying options as far as the overall layout and just kind of the overall aesthetic of a room when it comes to round tables. So here are some of my tips if you are planning to do all of your floor plan for your wedding using round tables. So something that I feel to be true about round tables is it can be a little bit trickier to make a floor plan that is aesthetically pleasing when you first walk into a room. I feel like when you walk into a room and it's all banquet style tables, rectangle tables all together, there's some kind of impact that has. Maybe it's the communal effect since there's a bunch of tables pushed together. It just feels very intimate and communal, whereas you can't really get that with round tables. So that's one downside. However, there are a lot of ways that you can uniquely decorate these tables, and it's a matter of figuring out what is going to work with your space and be aesthetically pleasing to achieve this. So while it can be trickier, it does not mean that it is impossible or can't be done. So just make sure that when you are designing your floor plan, you're taking the size of the room into account, because you are able to use the space a little bit more effectively with round tables than you are rectangle tables. You're kind of pigeonholed into specific layouts when it comes to using only rectangle tables, more so than you are using round tables. Usually what I find to be best is if you're planning on having your tables set up for dinner in the same space that you're going to be having dances or a dance floor, is to use the dance floor as kind of the center of the layout, if your room allows for this. Obviously, this is going to vary depending on the space you're in and how large it is. But if it's an option to be able to have the dance floor kind of in the middle of the room and be able to set your round tables around it, or at least on either side of the dance floor, I feel like this typically works better in most spaces rather than doing a dance floor in the front or back and having all the tables in one spot. You can get away with that a lot more using rectangle tables because, again, they're typically pushed together and you're kind of putting everything in one space, keeping it a little bit more communal, and then having the dance floor on the other side. But when you're having the separation of those different tables being round tables, having it set up around the dance floor is nice. And then most people that are at those tables are going to have a good vantage point for the dance floor, because with a round table, you have people sitting on all sides rather than rectangle tables. You have everyone on one side facing one direction, everyone on the other side is going to have their backs to whatever's behind them. So that's another pro to having round tables if you are having a head table or a space where toasts are happening. With rectangle tables, if you are lining them up all parallel to your head table or sweetheart table, 50% of your guests are going to have their back to you. So with round tables, you only have 1 out of every 8 or however many people you're having at a table that's going to have their back to you, and they can just turn around. So really be cognizant of the space that you are planning to set up and be efficient in where you are placing the round tables and really filling that space in a way that's not going to feel vast and empty, but also still aesthetically pleasing. Next, with round tables, you pretty much have to use a linen. So with rectangle tables, you either have the option of like the folding table that you would put a linen over, or like I mentioned earlier, the farm table trend where it's just all wood, and this negates any need for a linen, which is nice. With round tables, you're pretty much only given the option of a folding round table that will require a linen. So some tips here. Number one, please get a linen that touches the floor. You wouldn't believe how much of a difference this makes. I know they're a little bit more expensive than drapes that don't go all the way to the floor, but it is so worth it, you guys. I feel like having the bottom 3 inches of the table being shown and seeing the table legs just instantly takes away any sort of dressed up feel in a wedding space. So get linens that are touching the ground. Typically, depending on your table size, this is usually a 120-inch round linen. Whatever your table size, just make sure that wherever you're getting your linens from, that they're going to be the linens that will touch the ground. Now, when it comes to linens, you can either go a classic white option, which if you're having a lot of colors incorporated into your florals, or maybe you're using colorful napkins or color in the space that's a little bit harder to match, or maybe you're using a ballroom that already has like some funky carpet with a ton of different colors in it, or something that the colors are kind of competing with what your design might be on your tables. This is where classic white is a great option. But you don't have to use just white or just a solid color. Linens on round tables is where you can really elevate that look. So if you are looking for something to really elevate the look and have an impact when you walk in, linens is always my number one choice to start with. And you can use linens that are textured or patterned or have some kind of cool design, different color, different types of fabric rather than just like your typical polyester blend linens can really make a big impact. And one of my favorite places to rent linens from, which it's great because it's all online, you can use these linens from wherever you are in the country. I think internationally as well, but don't quote me on that. I've never had to use them internationally, but BBJ La Tavola is a company that I use nearly every wedding I do, whether that's just for napkins or just for a head table. Being able to incorporate specialty linens, especially if you are located in a place that doesn't have a lot of options locally like we do here, this is a great option to be able to rent. They ship right to you and then you just ship them back at the end of the event. So you're still renting them, you're not having to purchase them, and then they're not your responsibility at the end of the event, you just send them back. So this is a great way to incorporate some style and some decor into your round tables. Next, let's talk about centerpieces. So when it comes to round tables, the actual decorating of them can be a little bit trickier than rectangle tables. I feel like it's just a little bit easier to spread out things across rectangle tables, or even just having one centerpiece on a rectangle table. It just feels a little bit easier to decorate. And with round tables, you're kind of juggling with the, is it looking full enough or too full kind of debacle. So when it comes to centerpieces, you have the option to either do like one arrangement, one centerpiece in the middle, or using multiple items. So if you are doing one centerpiece, I have seen and done both ways, and I think either one works great, and it really just depends on what your space is and how many guests and how many tables you're going to use as for what's going to make the most sense for you. So you can either do every single table the same and just have one arrangement, one centerpiece in the middle, or use multiple items in the center. So if you're going to do like multiple bud vases or maybe multiple candles, this is another great way to fill that space in the middle of a round table. If you are doing multiple items, I typically like to work in odd numbers. So if you're doing like a clump of candles, using 3 or 5 candles rather than even numbers, I feel like just looks a little bit better clustered together in the center. Or maybe you're gonna do like 3 bud vases and 5 pillar candles or something like that. We're using odd numbers of items to fill that space. Round tables, you can also play around with different heights and varying levels and textures when it comes to your round table centerpieces. So I like to have varying types of centerpieces when it comes to round tables, especially if you have a lot, if you have a large guest count and you're going to have a pretty large number of tables. It's nice to switch it up a little bit, and walking into a space with a ton of round tables, it is more aesthetically pleasing to have kind of varying heights across the table. It'll also help it feel a little bit less like banquety, if that makes sense. So having low centerpieces on some of the tables and then taller centerpieces on other ones, which, quick note here, I was gonna get into this later, but I feel like this makes sense here. If you are going to do taller centerpieces, what I mean by that is not centerpieces that are going to have like a solid vase like this right in the middle, right? And it's taller, but then you have flowers coming out the top. If you're doing a tall centerpiece, have it be hollow or clear or something that's not going to obstruct the view in the middle. So I have done a lot, I'll put a picture here, I've done a lot of taller centerpieces that are in more of a stand. So it's not blocking the view of anything, but it's still giving that height and the varying heights across the different round tables. On that note, if you are doing just one solid centerpiece, just be aware of the height, the width, however that's going to fit on the table and how that might affect the guests and their view at the table. So if you are having just one centerpiece, make sure that it's not going to be a centerpiece that's going to end up blocking either the view of the person in front of them or the view of whatever is happening at your wedding. On the note of having various centerpieces for round tables, this is also a great way to save money on flowers. If you are planning to have a pretty large wedding, if you're going to have a lot of tables that are going to require an arranged centerpiece, like a floral arrangement, that adds up so quickly. So switching it up a little bit and maybe having some tables that only have candles on them, or maybe having some tables that have a floral arrangement and some tables that are bud vases, that will help cut down that cost a little bit so you're not having to spend this chunk of money on a floral arrangement for every single round table that you have. And finally, don't overload your place settings. So on a rectangle table, you can get away with having more items on the table as far as like a charger and multiple flatware options, multiple glassware options, because you can spread it out a little bit better on a rectangle table. On a round table, things start to creep really closely together when you are putting a lot of people around a round table. So typically having multiple glassware options and multiple flatware options does not work as well with round tables if you are putting 10 people at a table. Depending on the size of table you have, usually 8 to up to 12 people is how many you can fit at a table. I only recommend having 8 is ideal at a table. If you do have the larger round tables, 10 can fit there. Do not put more than 10 people, even if whoever you're renting them from says they can fit 12. Highly recommend not fitting more than 10 people at a round table. Then that's when it becomes a lot more tricky to be able to fit all the place settings around a round table. So as we're seeing round tables trending again, here are some tips to effectively decorate your wedding using round tables. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.